Okay, good day everyone. Welcome to ME154. I hope you are safe where you are. And unfortunately, we don't have any in-person classes for the entire week. So we'll just have to make do. So first of all, apologies for my voice. I've been having trouble with my throat recently. So if there are any problems with my voice for this recording, I hope you can let it pass. So at this point, we'll be talking about friction elements. So friction elements here refers to components of your machine that are used to either transfer rotational motion or control rotational motion. And this is a very difficult topic, to be honest. So we have to split it into four parts. The first part here concerns these three that are in the title: the plate clutches, the cone clutches, and the disc brakes. So before then, we have to discuss how are we going to look at these elements, because they can be a little bit complicated. So let's start first with a sort of an animation of how a car clutch might work. So imagine. Oh, hold on. Let me just change my pointer. All right. So here you go. So imagine that your car's clutch. So if you're using manual, so you can imagine that you can pretend that this lever directly connects to your clutch, the clutch pedal. So there's your clutch pedal. When you press it, uh, this clutch lever, the other side of your lever is actually connected to this movable hub, and this movable hub controls whether the clutch is engaged or not. Now, when it comes to clutches, we want to know how much torque we can transfer from the drive shaft into the rest of the transmission. Now, when it's a brake, we're concerned with the amount of torque that it can absorb from the rotation, such that we can either control the rotation or we can slow it down. In order to do this, though, as you can notice, we need to know how much force we're going to use in order to engage the clutch or the brake. So in this case, when you're driving a manual car, that force will be on the brake pedal. And we also need to know this, even if we don't use a brake pedal, if we just use electronic means, we need to solve for the engaging force or the actuating force. This is the force that is experienced by the clutch or the brake when it is pressed against whatever it is that it's trying to stop or transfer motion to. So as you can see here, this is a ring element, but if you look from the side, the force is actually distributed over the entire area of the clutch, and of course the entire area of the other surface that it's touching. Now, this force is spread out over a particular kind of area, and depending on the definition of that area, the function of the force will change. Now, the limiter when it comes to clutches and brakes is the material itself. It can only resist so much pressure, and the maximum pressure that you get, this thing that we call the actuating force, will be our point of safety. When we design clutches and brakes, we keep in mind what the limits of our current material are. If the required pressure is too much, essentially, we have to switch out our old lining for a new one that can serve our purposes. So, all right. So, let's assume that our braking material can withstand the pressure that our force will be exerting. We can then solve for our torque even further. So, as you can see here, this is just R times the force. This is the friction force because, of course, as the clutch is spinning, it's dragging along the other surface through friction. Now, this F sub F here is just the actuating force multiplied by the friction factor of the surface. And if you go further, we have a differential for force as well. We can expand that, substitute P times the differential of the area, and we get this. So these are the general expressions for our friction elements. Let me check. All right. Now, when it comes to friction elements, there are actually two modes of analyzing them. So the first one, for Shigley and I think Juvenile, they put this on second. But let's say you are an end user and you just bought a new clutch pad or a new brake lining. So that brake lining will behave as if um, the force is evenly distributed across that brake lining material. And this is where we get the uniform pressure model. So essentially, your pressure is not dependent on distance from the shaft. It is just the actuating pressure, the maximum. Now, the other method of analyzing friction elements is by assuming that the element itself has worn down. So, like for example, if you know your torque, oh, hold on. Yeah, all right. So we can draw. As you go further away from the center, the torque actually increases. So as the brake continues to be used, this part, these sections of the brake will start to wear out much sooner than the inner portion. And what happens is that the pressure that this part of the lining eventually feels will be much lesser than that of the inner. So that is where we get this thing that we call uniform wear. So wait, let me just adjust this. I don't know why it did this. Oh, all right. Hold on. All right. So it changed. Yeah, all right. So W here is the expression for the wear. This is the brake pressure times the linear velocity times time. So the wear actually increases over time. And the relevant relationship in this formula is actually P times V, pressure times the linear velocity. Of course, linear velocity in this case is R times our angular velocity, R omega. And we can derive a relationship of the pressure with respect to the location of the surface, or rather the location of the point. So in uniform wear, actually, your pressure actually decreases as you move further and further away from the shaft. So those are the two models. And now we will go on to our first kind of clutch. Now, this is called the plate clutch. Now, the plate clutch is actually found in automobiles. I'm not sure if they're still found there now, but if you're using manual and you've had um you've had someone tinker with your clutch system, this is the kind of clutch that you will usually have. So these are a series of abrasive plates. They are usually double-sided, and essentially, if you press the brake pad or if your automatic system engages the brake, these series of pads will press against a particular surface, and then it will cause the transfer of motion from the drive shaft to the rest of the transmission. So this is what it might look like. So if you can see here, the blue and yellow highlighted parts here are the plate clutches, and they tend to be donut shaped. So if you see here, these oranges, there is also a series of orange pads on the back side. So when you get here is that if you get one plate clutch, you usually get two plate clutches. Yeah, you have one side and then you have another side. And as for the method of engaging, of course, as you've seen in the animation, you also have this offset lever. So let's assume that that lever is directly connected to your clutch pedal. So if you press on the clutch, um, I believe you will disengage the hub here. You'll force the hub forward, and there are springs here that cause the clutch pads to lift away from the mating surface, and that disengages the clutch. By default, if you lift the clutch, this hub will be forced to move backward so that the clutch engages again. So it's kind of hard to show here, but it was easier to see in the animation in the previous slide. So of course, okay, so let's assume that this surface is uniform. Normally, these are manufactured in pieces, not in holes. But let's assume that this entire surface is just one big donut. In math, we call this kind of surface as the annulus. And with the annulus, you have your inner radius and you have your outer radius. To get the area of an annulus, you of course get the integration of the circumference times the differential radius element. Now, if you recall, we can now substitute this to our expression of the force and the torque. So we have our differential force expression here, and we have our differential torque expression here as well. So yeah, my nose is kind of acting up. Apologies for that. So just note this. Usually both sides are engaged. So that means normally you'd want to have an even number of clutch pads, or at least clutch surfaces for that. All right, so that's the expression for plate clutches and plate discs. Um, what are the expressions under those two models that we talked about before? So in uniform pressure, take note of this graph. The pressure is even whether you're in the inner radius or in the outer radius, and that has an effect on the formula. So for the actuating force that you actually need, this is where we go. So you'll get this expression with the radius, but you can transform that into diameters, and this is what you get. So you get 0.25 pi times the maximum pressure times the difference of the squares of the outer and the inner diameter. The required torque will undergo the same thing. It's basically integrating from the inner radius to the outer radius, and you'll get this expression. All right. Well, my nose is acting up. Also, there's a quick dig here. If you solve for the torque first and then you want to go to the force, there's a shortcut. So just recall that torque is equal to force times radius, right? And if you recall, torque here is some radius times the friction force. So it's friction factor times this. So the R that you need here is what we call the effective radius. And if you want to go from the torque to the force, just use this effective radius formula. Wait, how did we get this? So we got this by dividing this function by this times the friction force. And you'll get this expression, essentially. You can try it. It does pop out. Now, when it comes to uniform wear, as you can see on this pressure distribution, there is much more pressure inwards than outwards. That is because this part has worn down faster than the inner portion. And you'll get a expression for pressure like this. Now, of course, if you substitute that to your force and the torque and the effective radius, you'll get different expressions. This is what your expression is for uniform wear. This is for the torque. And, oops, sorry. This is for the effective radius. Okay, so we have two models. What's the difference? Like, is one better than the other? Now, from the onset, if our limit is the actuating pressure, the uniform pressure actually transfers a lot more torque than the uniform wear. So there's a lot more, because there's a lot more pressure on the brake pads, you can exert a lot more force, or a lot more torque rather. However, okay, so the pressure distribution is definitely different. Is there eventually, like, is there an effective difference in the actual setup? So yeah, it's kind of a confusing wording, but if you take the relationship of the variables here, if you do a Buckingham Pi grouping, and then you graph those groups in an XY diagram, you'll actually get this curve. So this is the normalized torque for the uniform pressure function, and then this is the normalized torque for the uniform wear. Our x-axis here is the ratio of the inner to the outer diameter, and the y-axis is the normalized torque. Now what you notice is that there is a difference as long as this ratio is low. So when is this ratio low? Of course, when your inner diameter is much, much smaller than your bigger diameter. But if you look at the image of our example plate clutches here, you'll see that the inner diameter is quite close to the outer diameter. So the effective range of our typical plate clutch is around here, zero point 0.6, maybe zero point 0.5, up to 1. So in this range, what you see here is that the uniform pressure torque kind of is close enough to the uniform wear. And what tends to happen is that because you want to design your elements for long life, you prefer to use the uniform wear model, even though this uniform pressure will give you the better output. Now, there are some systems designed to exert uniform pressure, whether or not the clutch ages or not. But we will not explore that kind of system here. So that is it for plate clutches. What about cone clutches? So cone clutches are kind of like plate clutches, but the inner radius is kind of pushed actually outward or inward rather. So this is what it looks like. So your brake lining on the plate clutch, at least the inner part, was stretched further out. So you get this kind of a cone frustrum shape. So here you have two cones. Your male cone has the brake lining, and your female cone is connected to what I presume is the drive shaft. Now you have your same method of engagement. You have an offset lever here. This one is connected to the clutch control. And of course, depending on the position of that clutch control, your female cone will engage with the male cone or disengage. Now, the effect of this is that if you have a cone clutch, part of the pressure that is felt by the brake lining will be radial inwards. So you have this kind of wedging effect. So essentially, this shape helps you keep the clutch engaged for much less force, I assume. And of course, if you have a plate clutch that has the same radius, outer radius and inner radius, you'll actually get an equal amount of, or rather, you will get a higher torque transfer compared to a plate clutch. Now here are some examples. So this is a cone clutch from a cycle blower. So the female clutch is still connected. The male clutch is kind of buried, but you can see signs of the brake material here. So that gap here indicates a gap in the brake material. Here's another one. This is just the male cone. This is the male cone from the inner view. Here's the brake lining. The brake lining is, I think it's just riveted onto the cone. Here's another one. This one's also fastened. I'm not sure this is riveted, but yeah. Here's another example. So this is a different kind of brake lining, and here's another one. So this is a double-sided, double cone clutch here. I am not sure how it is used, but you can see the brake lining here, and most of the material here is, I believe, this is either brass plated or completely brass. I'm not sure. Now, if you also notice in our examples, the angle of the cone is a little shallow. No, it's a little deep. The cone clutch is the clutch angle is a little deep, so it's kind of closer to the horizontal than the vertical, and that angle is what we call the cone angle alpha. This cone angle is usually at 10 to 15 degrees, so it's really, really shallow from the horizontal POV, and it has an effect on the differential area. So now you have this sine alpha term beneath your old definition of differential area. And if you look at your FBD for one section of the cone lining, you'll see that the pressure is still applied normal to the surface. The consequence of that is that your force, your actuating force, is still in the actual direction. So only the the force here only has to counter the some component of the pressure and not all of it. So this is the result of that. So only part of the pressure is being countered by the actuating force. Is this true for the torque? Not really. That is because the friction force that the brake lining feels or the other side feels is perpendicular to the normal force. And that normal force is countered by the entirety of the pressure. So the expression of the torque is unchanged. It's just that the area, the dA in our case, is changed. So okay, what are the expressions for uniform pressure? This is it. This is it. For the uniform wear, this is it. This is it. All right. So these are different formulas. Again, is there a difference? There is a difference as long as your inner diameter is much smaller than your bigger diameter. Otherwise, just like as you've seen in these examples, again, the diameter is measured from the actual shaft axis. So if you compare this to the plate clutch, the value of the outer and the inner diameters are actually much closer for the conical in comparison. Let's go back to that slide. Oh, sorry. Wrong. Wrong one. Okay. So there we go. However, okay, so let's compare plate clutches and cone clutches with the same radii. So if they have the same radii, inner outer radius, yes, the cone clutch will transmit much more torque compared to even a new axle brake. However, as you've seen in the example, you don't see cone clutches with this amount of area. Usually, you preserve this amount of area for the plate clutch, but you just angle it up. So when you angle it up, or angle it down rather, when you angle it down, the effective outer radius actually decreases. And if you assume that, the amount of torque is actually sort of reduced, a little bit reduced. Let's just say that the relationship changes. So this is a new axle brake and this new cone clutch brake. Well, you can substitute that. It's either a new axle brake or a new axle clutch. Yeah. All right. So on to our last one. So our last one here is called the disc brake. The irony here is that the pads themselves are not in the shape of discs. These are referring to the discs that the pads are engaging with. So the disc brakes, these are the most commonly seen types of brakes. So you see this in motorcycles, on automobiles, and even in bikes. You have those little pincer brakes for some mountain bikes. Those are also disc brakes. Now, another name for this kind of brake is the caliper brake. The caliper refers to the part of the brake that engages the pads. So if we call it disc brake, it refers to this disc. If we call it a caliper brake, it refers mostly here to this part. So this is called a caliper. The thing here is that the brake lining is now an annular sector. So it's not a full circle. So as expected, the amount of force and torque that you need to exert is much greater if you want to achieve the same amount of force or torque respectively as plate clutch. So this is just the formula for the plate clutch, but now you have this difference in angle multiplied. So this difference in angle, its units are in radians. And I need to remind you, under the MLT theta dimension analysis, angles are unitless. So this will have no effect on the units whatsoever. So, all right. Given this, the location of the force and the torque become much more relevant because again, this is now a sector. So, in order to find that, we can locate for the effective radius of your element. So, this is essentially the same concept as we discussed for plate clutches, but it is now specified in this slide. However, as it turns out, the location of the actuating force is actually a little different from the effective radius. So this is a symbol for the location of the force, and we can calculate that. And it turns out that the location of the force is actually the effective radius times this fraction. So it's kind of weird, but it is what it is. So of course, we have a uniform pressure set of equations, and then we have a uniform wear set of equations. Is there a difference? What you find out is, at least for the disc brakes, the uniform wear equations are a lot simpler. They're much simpler. All right. So that's it. Let's go to some analysis and design problems. Whoa. So maybe that felt a little fast. You can use the pause button to take things in. But for this section, we'll only be tackling two types of problems that are emblematic of the kind of problems that you will see for this section. So here, we have an analysis section. This is found in Shigley 9th, example 16.3. So if you're lost, you can actually go to that part of the handout and see or track the solution so that you can kind of absorb it better. So we have this series of given. So you have an aged disc brake. So again, this is a disc brake. So it's an annular sector. It's not a full annulus. It's an annular sector, the type that you see on motorcycles. So you have the following given. You have two pads, of course. You never see a disc brake that only has one pad. That is weird. So you can kind of imagine that you have one pad on one side, you have the other pad on the other, and those pads are being squeezed together to produce the braking force. Now you have your inner radius, you have your outer radius, you have your friction factor, and you have the sector angle that the brake subtends. So theta 2 minus theta 1 is essentially 108 degrees in this case. Now this disc brake is meant to deliver 13 kips inch of braking torque, and we have to find the maximum pressure, the required force, the effective radius, and the location of the actuator itself. So this is quite straightforward actually. If you look at the given, we don't need a lot of guesswork. We just need to plug and play for this case. Now the only difference here is that for the torque we have a new number here. We have two, but the rest is the same. And as you've noticed here, the only unknown here is the actuating pressure. Now, why is this 2? That is because the braking torque is being spread between two brake pads. So take note of that. It's not included in the equation, but you have to account for it. So the more brake pads you have, the more evenly distributed the braking torque and the force will be. So that results in actually a lot less pressure on the braking pad. So this is the pressure that you will solve. And since you already know the pressure, you can now solve for the actuating force. I won't flash the equation here, but you can try it by on your lonesome. So this is the force. This is the effective radius. This is the location of the force. So is it that easy? If we're just plugging and playing, yes, it is that easy. Now, all right. So what model did we use for this case? Now, if you check here, an easy way to know what model you used is that for uniform wear, usually the inner radius or the inner diameter is kind of left out of the difference, whether that's squares or cubes or whichever. So this one is a uniform wear. This was signaled by the aged disc brake comment. So when it says aged, you immediately assume uniform wear. If it's not stated, always assume uniform wear. All right, so that's the rule. So okay, like what if new brake pad? So this is not included in the handout. So it's essentially asking what if we use the uniform pressure model? What do we get out of this? So our first unknown will be the pressure, and as it turns out, what do you think? Is the will the pressure be higher for a uniform pressure brake, or will it be lower? Turns out it's actually much lower, and it's significantly lower. It's like negative 18.5% lower. So orange here is the uniform pressure model. Red here is the uniform wear. Will that show up in the force? Like, will there be a significant effect on the force? Not really, not so much. So, even though there's a lower pressure required here, the uniform wear distribution has some a bit of it being higher, but some bit of it being lower than the uniform pressure. So it kind of cancels out the difference. If you see here, look at the difference. It's really low. Even though you have a much lower pressure limit. So yeah, that's new insights for this problem. So all right, this time we'll change our pace. This time we have a design problem. This is now from Juvenal and Marshak. This is fifth, not the 15th. This is example 18.1D. Now for this case, we have a plate clutch, and the plate clutch is wet. So it has a friction factor of 0.06. When do you usually see wet clutches? I believe this is the case when you have hydraulics handling the plate clutches. So the plate clutches, they are invariably exposed to the lubrication. And they are designed to resist 1.4 megapascals. Now the clutch is designed to transmit 85 newton meters of torque. And the space is such that you can only fit clutches of up to 100 mm in diameter. Now we are tasked with finding the inner diameter, the number of disc pads, so that is the sides of the brakes, and the clamping force, F. So this one is not as straightforward, so we can try. There is no information on whether this is new or not, but since we want to design for longevity, we use the uniform wear model. So this is the formula. Again, the N is not included, but we do need to have it because we are assuming that we might need multiple plate clutches. So okay, let's check. How many unknowns do we have? Or rather, how many knowns do we have? We know the torque. We know the friction force. We have an actuating pressure here, and we have a bigger diameter. If we assume that we fit the plate clutch exactly to the T of the limit, so we use 100 mm in this case. So here we actually have two unknowns. We don't know the number of clutches, and we don't know the inner diameter. So the problem here is, okay, so which one do we guess? Do we guess the number of plates, or do we guess the inner diameter? For this case, I think the more practical option is to just guess the inner diameter. So, okay, like, what's my constraint? So, if you saw one of the graphs, earlier graphs in this lecture, there is a typical range for the inner diameter. It's zero point 0.6 to 1 times the outer diameter. I'll show the graph now. So, it's here. This is small d over big D, and the normal range is around zero point 0.6 to 1. So going back, let's go back. All right. So we guess around zero point 0.6 to 1 times D. And to be safe, all right, let's select the midpoint. All right. So we select, okay, 80 mm. So that is our inner diameter. Now, okay, so we now have our known diameter. We only have one unknown, the number of plate clutches. And what you'll end up with is this value, 8.94. But again, we need the clutch pad count to be even because our clutch pads are usually double-sided. The clutch itself, the plates are double-sided. So we round up, we use 10. All right, so we only need to solve for the force. But this time, of course, we do have a shortcut. And I think this applies a bit more because I think there are some changes occurring when we change the number of uh, clutches essentially. I think the effect is that the pressure reduces, so we have to account for that. But using this method, with the torque being defined as the number of clutch pads times the friction force times the effective radius times the actuating force, we can skip that step. Essentially, if you do this, you have to solve for the effective radius first, and that can be solved because we do know our big diameter and our small diameter. So you can go back to the slides, you can get the equation, and you actually get this. This is the force. Are we done? Yes, we're done. So for this case, for such a design problem, there are multiple answers. Um, Now you might be thinking, okay, so there are multiple answers, but is there one answer that is more right than the rest? For this problem, there's no such thing. But as engineers, you're always asking the question: is there something that is more right than all of the others? And that question is called kind of an optimizing problem. This is not included in the example. It's not asking us to do this, but we can actually figure out if there is an optimal choice for the inner diameter. And that involves taking the definition of the torque and then differentiating it with respect to the inner diameter. If we equate that to zero, we'll get an expression for small d relating to big D. And it turns out there is an optimal choice for an inner diameter, and that is a 1 over square root of 3 times the bigger diameter, or 0.577. Now, this is slightly out of range for your typical clutch pad. So normally you just select the zero point 0.6 value for the inner diameter. But okay, so let's optimize. To make things simpler for our manufacturers, we just select 58 mm as our inner diameter. And what is the effect on our clutch pad count? The effect is that to deliver the same torque, we need a lot less clutch pads. So we just need 8 compared to 10 from previously. And okay, so we optimize the inner diameter. What's the effect on the force? Will it also reduce? Actually, it rises. The rise comes from the fact that we reduce the required count of the clutch pads. So the clutch pad count reduces for the optimal choice, but the force kind of has to compensate to deliver the same 85 Newton meter torque. So yes, there is an optimal choice. However, sometimes you can't reach the optimal choice, so you grab the next best thing. So essentially, what this means is that when you only remember the range of inner diameters that are perfect for a plate clutch or a disc clutch or disc brake, you can just select the smallest one possible. And that's it. That's it for our lecture. I think we won't be having any assignments for this because I think we have a homework and then we have an online exercise as well. And then I'm not sure if we'll be able to meet again. And I want you guys to be focused more on the long exam next week rather than this. So I think I'll just leave this as a plain material. So with that, thank you so much.